Hello everyone, welcome to another set of notes. These notes are kind of exciting because we are moving into our last unit, if you can believe it. Obviously this is not the last set of notes, but this is the beginning of our last chunk. This will be our last note packet and our last quiz, and then we will have a midterm. Well, I guess this would be a final exam. Something similar to the midterm that you took. You will not be taking the SOL, which is a plus. But that's it, yeah. These notes of this last unit will take this week and next week, and we will not have a quiz this week. Our quiz will be next week, and then your final exam will probably be 2 weeks after that. So we're still looking at least 3 weeks, probably more like a month after that. So yeah, that's what our next couple weeks look like. So let's dive right in. We talked about how at the end of our Great Depression notes, how FDR's New Deal does not officially end the Great Depression. It certainly improves conditions. It probably would have been a lot worse without the New Deal. But the thing that really ends the Great Depression in the United States is World War II. We don't join it right away. Apparently, that's our little thing. But that's what really brings us out of the Great Depression. Let's look at how the whole circumstances of World War II get set up, though, because we got a little bit to cover before that. Okay. Europe is still a mess from World War I, and of course is also going through the Great Depression. Remember that the Great Depression is not only a United States phenomenon. That is true about the whole world. The whole world is going through a Great Depression with us. Obviously, we focused on the United States, though. This is United States history. At the time of the Great Depression, World War I wasn't that long ago. It was only 15 or 20 years ago. So it's very likely, and was in fact the case, that much of Europe hadn't really recovered from the war yet. There's still trenches everywhere that haven't been kind of filled in and stuff. Factories and homes and cities are still working on being rebuilt after bombings and such. And so people are not over it. On top of that, we have the Great Depression. Nobody has money. Everybody is just trying to, make it. We have extensive unemployment, underemployment, homelessness, and all the problems that come with those things. And so everyone's really bitter. Germany is extra bitter. Not only are they going through all of these things, they are going through more than anyone else is going through because of all of those terms from the Treaty of Versailles, bringing World War I to an end. Remember, it said Germany was to blame for World War I. We know that's not true. We know Austria, Hungary, and Serbia are to blame for World War I, but Germany is the one that gets told this is your fault. That can be very frustrating when something isn't your fault, but someone says, oh, you caused this. That can be very, very frustrating. Treaty of Versailles also says Germany can't have any more military disarmament. Okay? Germany can't have any colonies. We had to give those away to the Allied powers. Germany has to pay reparations, $33 billion of reparations, money as an apology to Britain and France. That is a lot of money. That is a lot of money. Remember, Germany didn't finish paying that back until 2010. 10 years ago. Germany didn't finish paying back this reparations until 10 years ago, almost 100 years after World War I. In your lifetime, Germany was making payments on their reparations from World War I. That is insane. So imagine 70 years ago, you can feel like the money is never going to be paid back, right? When you have billions of dollars left to repay, that can be very frustrating. You can feel a lot of anger from that. So Germany is extra bitter. In this anger, Adolf Hitler rises to power. He is kind of an interesting character. He went to art school, dropped out of art school because he failed. His grandmother was Jewish, so he was technically 1/8 Jewish, which is interesting. due to his later activities. And he almost died in World War One. Somebody saved his life, and they're probably regretting it. But just kind of a weird, odd person. I don't. Anyway, we won't get into that. He rises to power in this kind of upset and anger through the National Socialist German Workers' Party. The abbreviation for this is the Nazis, is probably what you've heard of. It makes more sense in German if we were to say the name of the party, National Socialist German Workers' Party. If you were able to translate that into German, the abbreviation Nazis makes a little bit more sense. But that's fine. We don't really need to know the whole title. I just like to point that out. They were socialists. That's something that surprises people. I don't want to get too deep into socialism because that's going to take like another hour. But it's basically like a light version of communism. If that makes any sense? Hopefully it does. In a socialist government, the government controls some, but not all, business. Usually businesses that would provide a service to the people at a cheaper cost. A lot of people usually talk about higher education, college, or healthcare when they talk about socialist governments. Something that the Nazi Party kind of took over when they got into power was the automobile industry, and they founded a government brand automobile. And you may have heard of it. It's called Volkswagen. Yes, that's right. The Volkswagen was the Nazi car. Yikes. Obviously, no longer affiliated to the Nazis, right? But that's what Volkswagen means, the people's car. And that was the car that you drove if you lived in Nazi Germany, because that was the car company. So kind of interesting to think about. So if you know anybody who drives Volkswagen, you can tell them that that's a Nazi car. Although probably like very quickly follow it up with like not anymore. You know what I mean? Don't let them hanging, thinking that you're being a jerk. Anyway, I'm getting way off topic here. The early rise of Hitler is interesting. He was a very strong leader. People actually really admired him. He ran a very disciplined army. He was very like well respected by the people, which, looking back is kind of a bit of brainwashing and stuff. But every time, he went somewhere, there were huge crowds cheering him. Woo! And the world was impressed. The world was like, oh, that is so cool. I wish they did that for me. That is really cool. I like the way that he's running Germany right now. In fact, he was Time Magazine's Person of the Year. I think it was 1939. It might have been 1938, but I want to say 1939. Time Magazine's Person of the Year, Adolf Hitler. Yikes. But people kind of thought he was just a good leader before he started making all kinds of, wacky murdering decisions. He also does something that seems kind of silly, but it's actually kind of a pretty big deal. He makes people feel better by telling them it's not their fault. And this can be very calming for people when you feel very angry and frustrated and helpless. So don't worry, this Great Depression and all the problems after World War I, don't worry, they are not your fault, right? Someone else has done this to you, and we're going to get, revenge, if you will. We're going to get payback. We're going to make them pay for what they did. Unfortunately, the group he singles out are Jewish people, but that is another note, not these. Once Hitler comes to power, he starts breaking all of the rules that the Treaty of Versailles had set up on Germany after World War I. Hitler says, oh, we're not supposed to have an army? Oh, well, I don't care. We're going to have an army, and we're going to have a great army. Oh, we're not supposed to have colonies? Oh, well, I'm going to conquer other countries, and they'll be our colonies. Whoops. And so everyone's starting to get a little nervous because they're like, I don't think this is the way that this is supposed to go. And so everyone starts to get really nervous. Hitler also makes an agreement with Russia. This seems like kind of a minor thing, but it will become important in a minute. He makes an agreement with Russia. He says, "Hey, Russia, it's Hitler. I was thinking about going out today and conquering Poland. Do you want to come with? And if you help me, you can have half of Poland." And Russia is like, "Sure." The leader is Stalin. We'll talk about him in a minute. "Sure, I would love to take half of Poland. That is so awesome." And so they make this pact to conquer Poland. And Poland is in between Russia and Germany. And it's just sitting there like, please don't. The League of Nations gets word of this, but they can't do anything really to stop them. The League of Nations doesn't have a lot of power. They can't impose any restrictions or sanctions or anything like that, and they really can't do anything. And so they're pretty much limited to just writing him a letter, a strongly worded letter. "Hey, dear Hitler, it's us, the League of Nations. Please don't touch Poland. Leave Poland alone. Sincerely, the League of Nations." And they mail him this letter, and he might have read it. I don't know. He probably used it as toilet paper because he doesn't care. And he does not stop. He's not going to listen to some strongly worded letter from the League of Nations. Europe and the League of Nations end up trying to basically appease Hitler by just letting him have Poland. To appease someone is to kind of give it what it wants in the hopes that it'll calm down, right? So I always like to use the kind of mental image of a toddler having a meltdown in the grocery store, right? Kids screaming and crying and rolling around on the floor, and the mom's like, "Well, if you stop crying, we can get ice cream on the way home." Okay, that would be trying to appease that child, right? Giving them something in the hopes that they'll just cool it. And that doesn't always work, right? And of course, I'm sure we all have parents who would act quite differently. If I was crying like that in the grocery store, we were just going home. Europe's way of trying to appease Hitler is to let him have Poland. Now, Poland probably didn't like this very much, but that's where they were. Europe said, "Okay, Hitler, okay, you can have Poland, but don't conquer anyone else." And Hitler says, "Sure, whatever," and totally ignores them. He takes Poland, and he completely breaks his agreement with Russia, too. He sees the opportunity to have all of Poland instead of half of Poland. And so he takes it, and he controls all of Poland. And Russia is like, "Bro, we had a pact. Why are you doing this?" Again, this seems not important, but it will become important in a minute. Hitler goes on this kind of like little rampage thing that he's on and invades neighboring Belgium. And this is what really kicks us off for World War II. The Allied powers team up again. Allied powers assemble, like the Avengers. And they declare war on Germany. Who are the Allied powers? Luckily for you, it is the exact same as World War I. Same name and same people. Great Britain, they are back, and they are led by Winston Churchill. He is pretty famous, I would say so. He is also in the show The Crown on Netflix, if you can watch that. I love that show. France is also in the Allied powers, but they are quickly captured by Germany. They get captured by German tank groups in like 6 weeks. So they're pretty much down for the count for a lot of the war. They don't completely give up. Like half of France gives up and kind of surrenders to the Germans. And then there's this like secret government in the Vichy government. They're like trying to overthrow Germans. It's kind of complicated. It's a lot more than we need. Hopefully Mr. Anderson or Mr. McKernan covered that in World II. And then we have the Russians in the Allied powers led by Joseph Stalin. Remember, Russia is communist at this point in time. We don't like that very much, but we'd rather have Russia on our side than not on our side. So we kind of deal with it. These are our leaders. Winston Churchill for Great Britain. We don't really have any major French leaders. Again, there are French leaders, but not anyone we need to know for the purposes of this class. If you find yourself with some extra time while you're at home, maybe do some research on that. It's kind of interesting. And we got Joseph Stalin with this wonderful communist propaganda over here. This is the symbol of Russia, by the way, and it's also taken on kind of a communist meaning as well. The scythe and the hammer, they're symbols of the labor class. Again, I don't want to get too deep into communism. We'll save that for our Cold War notes. Joseph Stalin, like a young Joseph Stalin when he was kind of in his teens, looks like Zayn Malik from One Direction. So there's that tidbit for you. And you can't tell me I'm wrong because I'm not. Anyway, the bad guys in this war are called the Axis powers. Remember, World War I, the quote-unquote bad guys are the Central powers. World War II, Axis powers. Also remember for World War I that we talked about how the bad guys aren't really the bad guys, right? The only reason they were the quote bad guys was because they weren't on our team. It wasn't really anything that they specifically did that was bad. Austria-Hungary was defending themselves against somebody who murdered their prince, murdered one of their leaders. I don't really think that that is such a horrible thing necessarily. And so it was a little iffy as to whether they truly were the bad guys. These guys on the Axis powers, they are the bad guys. We can definitively use the term bad guys to describe the gentlemen on the Axis powers. The kind of unspoken leader here is Adolf Hitler, the leader of Germany. We've already talked about him in the beginning of these notes. Also on the Axis powers is Italy, led by Benito Mussolini. Benito Mussolini. Gotta use my Olive Garden voice for that. He is like a really scary looking guy. I'm going to show you his picture in a minute. He's kind of horrifying. He looks like a serial killer. And actually that's probably because he is a serial killer. He's a super crazy kind of guy. He's a fascist, which is like basically a dictator. Yeah, that's good there. And then Japan. Now, let's talk about Japan really quick. So the name I have on the screen right now is Hideki Tojo. He was not technically like the leader of Japan. Japan had an emperor. I guess still has, but anyway. The emperor at the time of World War II was Emperor Hirohito. But the emperor like wasn't really important. Like he's important because he's like the emperor. But Hideki Tojo is what we call the military shogun, which means he was the leader of the military and was the one responsible for making the military decisions. So I put him on here instead of Emperor Hirohito because Hideki Tojo is really the one who's making the military decisions throughout World War II. They both weren't really great guys, but in my opinion at least, Hideki Tojo was a little bit worse. Still, again, neither of them great guys. These are all leaders. They are strict dictators. They suppress political opponents. They kill people who outwardly disagree with them and their policies in order to stay in power. I'll show them to you. Here we go. So Hitler all the way here on the right, probably the one you recognize the most. Here's Hideki Tojo. You can see he's got all of these military like crosses and awards and stuff since he was a military shogun. And then this is Benito Mussolini. I don't know what it is. Just something about his face is just like really creepy to me. I'm not sure what it is, but he is just weird. And also a murderer. So that might be it. I don't know. Maybe that's it. But these are our bad guys. As I said, the United States does not join this war right away. We stay isolationist. We're working on our Great Depression. We are trying to deal with our own business. And the war doesn't really involve us. Doesn't stretch to our borders. Yet. Bum, bum, bum. We are not totally disconnected, though. Franklin Roosevelt, FDR, he's president through most of World War II. signed something called the Lend-Lease Act. Both of those words mean to loan somebody, possibly for payment. You can lend somebody a pencil, you'll probably get it back. You can lease a car or an apartment, but you don't officially own it. You're just paying to use it for a certain period of time. We do this so that we can help out our friends. Obviously, we're still friends with Britain and France. We want to help them out, but we don't want to officially get involved in this war. So, through this Lend-Lease Act, we allow them to use our Navy ships and our Army bases and planes and stuff. Since we are not involved in the war, we don't need it. Might as well let them use it. FDR was quoted as saying that this was like lending a garden hose to your neighbor when their house is on fire, right? Is it going to do much? No. Is it going to solve the problem? No. Will you feel like a jerk if you don't try and help put your neighbor's house fire out? Probably. And so that's what he kind of equated this to. We've got to help them out. Is it going to turn the tide of the war? No. Are we kind of obligated to help our neighbor? Yes. So that's how he kind of justified it or described his decision there. So isolationist in the way that we haven't declared war on anybody. We're not mobilizing troops, but we're not really neutral because we are actively providing military weapons and stuff to only one side during this war. So it's very clear what side we would be on. At the same time, Japan is kind of going ham in and around Asia. They're starting to attack their neighbors. They take over parts of China called Manchuria, and they're kind of tearing through the Pacific Ocean, conquering coastal Asian nations and island Asian nations as well. Well, I'll talk about that in a minute. We, again, kind of try to get involved without really getting involved. We don't like what Japan is doing, so we put restrictions on what they can buy from us, particularly oil, as well as some other products. And Japan had very rapidly industrialized, so they really rely on a lot of oil, oil and gasoline and stuff. And so by putting these restrictions, it's really kind of hurting their economy. And honestly, that's what we were trying to do. We were trying to, say, hey, cool it, basically. If you cool it, we'll let you buy oil from us again. But if you don't cool it, then you're not going to get any oil. We're trying to get them to calm down a little bit, and they are not calming down. Japan, I just read a book about this. Japan was quite brutal in their, treatment of everybody. I was going to say treatment of prisoners, because that's what the book I read was. But pretty much treatment of everybody. They're quite savage in this war. To the point where one of their attacks on a Chinese city called Nanking was called the Rape of Nanking. And that word was chosen, it evokes quite a powerful emotion there. So we'll talk a little bit more about how Japan handles this war in a minute, but that's where we are with there. The official beginning of World War II is 1939, when Hitler invades Belgium. The European Allied powers declare war. We stay out of it for 2 years. We're given our, Navy ships and Air Force bases and stuff, but we have not officially declared war on anybody. Japan forces us to get involved. On December 7th, 1941, Japan bombs a naval base, U.S. naval base in Hawaii called Pearl Harbor. It was a Sunday morning. And there was no warning for the attack, right? Since we hadn't really declared war on anybody, we weren't really involved in the war. They probably weren't too happy about the economic sanctions, but we hadn't officially joined this war. December 7th, 1941. The very next day, December 8th, FDR makes a speech to Congress, encouraging Congress to declare war on Japan. And this is what gets us involved in World War II. Of course, Congress immediately declares war on Japan. Then Germany declares war on us, and we declare war back on them. And here we are. FDR called this, you may hear this, FDR called Pearl Harbor, the attack on Pearl Harbor, a day that will live in infamy. Okay, that's a very famous quote of his. Let's talk about what infamy means. Infamy means famous, right? We see fame kind of there. Infamy, or to be infamous, means you are famous, but for a bad reason. People know your name, but not for a good thing. Okay? And it can be kind of serious, or it can be sometimes used in a little bit of a lighthearted way. So, for example, a serious version. Adolf Hitler is infamous. Okay? Everybody knows the name Adolf Hitler. There aren't too many people on this planet who go, oh, Adolf Hitler, my role model. Okay? And if they are, they're not the kind of people we want to be around. That would be a more serious use of infamy or infamous. Like I said, people can sometimes use infamous in a more lighthearted way, right? Like we might say, the live-action movie Cats. Okay, that is a bit of an infamous movie, right? It's just a movie. It's not anything too serious, but it's certainly not remembered for being an Oscar-winning film. We might say that that would be an example of a kind of lighthearted use of the word infamy. So that's what infamy means. Famous for bad reasons. Now, I say this every single time. I have this slide in every single PowerPoint about a war. This is a tough war. It's tough for Germany and the United States because we are fighting what is called a two-front war. Okay? A front is where the thick of the fighting is, right? When we have a two-front war, there are two places in which there is very heavy fighting. Germany had enemies on both east and west sides. To the east, they have the Allied power, Russia, which is technically the Soviet Union at this point. And to the west, they have France, which they've kind of conquered, and Great Britain. We also have this problem, okay? It's a little bit more stretched out because we have oceans on each side of us. But to the east, we have Germany in Europe, and to the west, we have Japan in the Pacific Ocean. Both the United States and Germany have to figure out where do we focus our attention. If we split our army, we run the risk of being easily defeated. We have to figure out where to put our priorities. In terms of the US, we decide to put our priority on Europe first. France is taken over. Britain's hanging on by the skin of their teeth, and so we decide we need to focus on defeating Hitler and the Italian Empire in Italy first. So we need to take down Hitler and Mussolini first. Then, after we did that, we turn our full attention to Japan. Now, we're not ignoring Japan. We still have many significant battles in the Pacific while we are also fighting in Europe, but we are more concerned about Europe than Japan. Does that make sense? You guys are in the computer. You're not going to answer me. But anyway, I've filmed like 6 of these videos today. I'm so tired. Anyway, Germany's plan, right? So that was the U.S. plan. Germany's plan is to defeat Russia first and then focus on everyone else. Germany had this military strategy of just kind of coming in really quick, taking over, and then kind of slinking away, right? If we can attack them really quick, they'll be so, caught off surprise, the element of surprise, right? They'll be so surprised that they won't be able to really fight back. And this was called Blitzkrieg. I do a cool hand thing there, right? Karate chop, right? And you got to say it like that. It helps you remember it, right? And so Germany thinks we're just going to slide in, take Russia by surprise, Blitzkrieg, and then just go home and be able to fight only a one-front war. Now, unfortunately for Germany, things go horribly, horribly wrong. I guess I shouldn't say unfortunately. Things go horribly wrong for them at the Battle of Stalingrad in 1942. And here's their critical mistake. The battle goes into the winter. You know, I actually have a good meme. One does not simply invade Russia during winter. This mistake has been made multiple times over history. The Mongols might have tried it, I can't remember. Napoleon definitely tried it. Everybody tried it. It doesn't work, okay? Now, I know when we have snow here, right, everybody still talks about the crazy big snowstorm, Snowmageddon that we had, you know, what was it, 5 years ago? We had 2-3 feet of snow, right? Russians wouldn't even blink twice at that. That's just like an average winter day. It snows so much in Russia. I'm talking like multiple feet. And they're just like okay with it. They just, I don't know, maybe it's all the vodka they drink. I'm not really sure. They just like don't notice anymore. But it is crazy. Russian winters are crazy. Germany is not prepared for this. Germany thought they were just going to come in and blitzkrieg and then just go home. So when this battle lasts into the winter, Germany and their soldiers are not prepared for this, and it is chaos. Well, they were doing pretty good. They kind of zoom up. Germany had these really fast tanks, they called Panzers, and they were just like zooming all through the countryside and just flying everywhere. And they get into like, I think it was like 50 miles. And they're ordered to take a rest, to spend one day and rest before they captured the city of Stalingrad. Boom, boom, boom. That night, it snows. I'm not kidding. And the Germans wake up and they're like, oh crap, their tanks are not built to drive through 6 feet of snow. Imagine that. And so they're kind of stranded. This is one of my favorite stories. The Russians are built for the snow. They train in the snow. They're you know how like camouflage, I'm talking to you guys like you're actually here. You know how like army camouflage, right? When I say army camouflage, I'm sure you picture it in your head. It's like that green, those earth tones, green and brown, kind of, it looks like leaves and brush. Yeah. Russian camouflage is white because they blend in with the snow. So they're in these like white, like free snowsuits, and they blend in with the snow, and they kind of basically take this opportunity, right? So the Germans are stranded because their tanks are stuck, and everyone's freezing because it's like super cold and nobody expected snow. And here comes the Russian army on skis. On skis. The army is on skis in these like Michelin Man snowsuits with like rifles and machine guns and stuff. And they just come like diving over these snowbanks and attacking the Germans. I can't imagine what that must have been like. Being shot at by the Michelin Man on skis in the dead of winter in Russia. I can't even imagine it. It just makes me laugh. But anyway, long story short, Russia is able to defeat the Germans and push them back out of Stalingrad. And the German blitzkrieg has failed. Germany doesn't give up, though. They're, they got a lot of negatives, but they're certainly not quitters here. And they decide to just continue with this kind of split war. Germany turns their attention to Western Europe. As I said, they've already conquered France. France got conquered a long time ago, and very quickly, too. They turn their attention to Britain, the United Kingdom. And since Britain is an island, it's not attached to Europe, there's not a ton of like really easy ways to get over there. Germany says, here's what we're going to do. We are going to fly planes full of bombs over Britain for 4 months. And that was the attack on Britain. That was Germany's attack, was just dropping bombs over major British cities for like 4 months. And that was called the Battle of Britain. If you have ever seen The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, I think that's the one. It's one of the Narnia movies. At the very beginning, they're all like running through the house. There's like sirens going off, and they're running through the house, trying to get their stuff, and they dive into this like underground shelter thing. That is the Battle of Britain during World War II. In fact, the whole premise of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, the kids were sent to live with their grandfathers because at their grandfather's house because their mom wanted them out of the country during the war. So that's what that is. Fun fact. Maybe you didn't know that. Britain does survive, though. They are able to outlast these bombings, and the Battle of Britain is not really a battle, but a British victory. This war is harsh. I say it once, I say it again. We still got submarines. Everybody has submarines now. We have more advanced airplanes. In fact, during World War II, we have what we call dogfights, which were airplane versus airplane battles. So they would just be airplanes just shooting at each other in the air. That's something we haven't had before. We had some airplane use during World War I, but it really kind of comes into, a significant military weapon during World War II. And we also have other, just in general, deadlier weapons we do every single war. It drags on for quite a while because both sides are very strong. Germany, in particular, has rearmed very, very strongly. They've done a lot of work to come up with a strong military that's ready for war, and it shows. It was definitely a tough fight. After the United States has joined the war, we decide, okay, we got to free France. We got to get France out of here, and then hopefully they'll be able to help us, defeat the Germans and get this war over with. We plan a special attack that ends up being called D-Day. You may have heard of it. So here's their plan. They organized the Air Force, Navy, Marine. I think everybody was there. Marines and the Army. Obviously, the Coast Guard wasn't there. I think everyone else was there. I think so. And they chose 5 different beaches near Normandy, France. They chose this location because it wasn't the obvious choice for like a landing, like an invasion site. The beaches were very cliffy, if that's a word. It's not like nice open beaches that roll onto like flat land. It's like beach and then very large cliff. So it's not the greatest site for an invasion. And that's kind of why they choose it, so that it's a bit of a surprise. The night before, they send the Air Force with planes to bomb the cliff top to try and lessen the amount of Germans that are up there. And then the next morning, very, very early in the morning, ships bring in foot soldiers to storm the beach and claim the beach. This was a very bloody battle. While the location allowed for some surprise attack, it also meant that Germans were standing on top of the cliff shooting down at the beach. And soldiers in the beach were, kind of like sitting ducks, basically. Somehow, through just sheer manpower and grit, I guess, it is an Allied victory, and this is the first kind of stronghold from which the Allied powers are slowly able to liberate France, to creep through France and free it from German occupation. This is a photograph from D-Day. You can see there's a lot going on here, right? So we've got blimps. Yes, the army had blimps. And then here's a bit close-up version. They're not that large. They're kind of small, not like the Goodyear blimps and stuff. But you can see that these ships are coming in, and they kind of, some of them have ramps. Sometimes you just had to wade through the water. And they're driving off trucks and soldiers and that kind of stuff. This is like post-battle. Does that make sense? Like, they're not in the heat of battle right now. This is a little while after the beach has officially been claimed, but you can still see that there's a lot going on. A lot of ships, a lot of vehicles, a lot of people. And this is only one little beach. There were 5 beaches. If I remember correctly, the Americans had 2 beaches. I think the British had 2 beaches. And I can't remember if it was the Canadians or the Australians had another beach. But the Canadians and the Australians did actually help. Australians, I'm going to say Canadians because I think the Australians were fighting in the Pacific. That would make the most sense. They are British protectorates, and so because Britain was involved in the war, they were involved in the war as well. A lot of people don't know that. Towards the end of 1944, and as we turn into 1945, it's pretty clear that the Allied powers are going to win. They've been working their way through France, creeping their way closer and closer and closer to Germany, reclaiming territory that Germany had claimed. And it's become very clear that at some point they're going to reach the capital of Germany, Berlin, and the war will be over. Germany tries to make one final push to kind of stop the Allied advance, and this is known as the Battle of the Bulge. As I said, Allied armies creeping closer and closer to Germany, and they're getting scared. Germany tries to kind of use all of their forces in the middle of the Allied line, which kind of pushed the Allied line back, and it created that kind of bump in the Allied border of territory, as hence Battle of the Bulge. It wasn't enough, though. The Allies win this battle, and this is pretty much the end of Germany's fight. This was the last like major confrontation of World War II. Okay, not the last like official battle, right? We still have battles, little skirmishes here and there, but this is the first notable battle. Last notable battle before the end of World War II. Unfortunately, our fearless leader, who has served for 3.5 terms, FDR, dies before the end of the war. He died about, if I remember, 2 weeks before the end of the war. I know, he couldn't hold on a little bit longer. We already talked about FDR and his death. He died of a heart attack or some sort of stroke aneurysm thing at his girlfriend's house. And his wife wasn't too happy about that. Dirty dog. Dirty Dan. Anyway, his vice president, Harry Truman, becomes president because that's how that works. And a few weeks later, we have official defeat of Germany on what we call VE Day. It stands for Victory in Europe Day. And that would be May 8th. It's coming up here. Friday. 1945. Maybe we'll have a little celebration for VE Day, Victory in Europe Day. Just like our plan all along, since we've now defeated Germany, Europe is back under control, we turn our attention to Japan in the Pacific. Okay, so VE Day signals the end of the war in Europe, but the war is not over because we still have to deal with Japan. Okay. In the Pacific, we use a strategy called island hopping. You may also hear people call this leapfrogging, okay? I don't use that term. I use island hopping, okay? But like I said, you may hear other people, if you go into college and take history classes and stuff, you may hear other people say leapfrogging. It's the same kind of mental image as island hopping, right? Bouncing from one place to another. And that's exactly what it was. Bouncing from island to island, reclaiming countries and island chains back from Japanese control. All along, Japan had just really hoped that we would just leave them alone and let them control the Pacific, and we weren't about to do all that. Okay? This is a map of our island hopping, right? So you can follow the green arrows as we bounce from island to island to island. Okay? And look at some of these dates, right? Even all the way up here, Midway, June 1942. Remember what I said? We weren't focusing our entire attention on the Pacific, but we certainly weren't just letting them do whatever they wanted. It certainly was a much slower advance. You can see that things start to pick up as we get into 1944, right? June through July, all right? July through August, September and November, October, right? Whereas over here we have June 1942, then like a year later, right? Here's another one down here. And so it takes us a little bit longer to move forward in those early years because our full military attention isn't focused there. Yeah. I wrote a book about this. So if we were in class, I'd show it to you. I think I actually already showed it to you. Anyway, yeah. We fight some incredibly tough battles, especially in the Pacific. Two of our really tough battles in the Pacific are the Battle of Iwo Jima and the Battle of Okinawa. And these battles were very long, months. I'm talking like months-long battles. Intense, very intense stuff. And the reason for that is the Japanese kind of honor code. Japanese honor code is called Bushido, and it is very much so focused on like the community as a whole, the country of Japan as a whole, instead of the individual. So, for example, it is better to die in battle than to live and surrender to the enemy, according to Bushido. Because if you're surrendering, you're putting your own life, your own welfare ahead of the success of your country, right? And so they see that as shameful. Somebody who has surrendered to the enemy is shameful. So many battles with the Japanese, or anybody who encounters a fight, a battle with the Japanese, notices that they typically fight to the death. They definitely don't take surrender very lightly. And so battles are very long and drawn out because they don't particularly, I mean, they care if they die, but it's not like, oh, I have to stop before I die. They're very okay with dying for the sake of Japan. In fact, there's a particular phenomenon called kamikaze pilots. You may have heard of the term kamikaze before. You probably don't know what it specifically means. A kamikaze pilot was basically a suicide pilot. And so what they would do is they would fly their plane into usually a ship, right? So they would fly their whole plane into an American naval ship, right? And because of all of the, gasoline and engines and stuff, it's basically a giant bomb when it comes into contact, when it crashes. So in that way, they are kind of sacrificing themselves for the success of by doing so. That's what a kamikaze pilot is. So that's kind of what's going on in Japan. And that's why these battles are so intense. We have a little trick up our sleeve, though. Throughout the entire war, we had been working on a secret project called the Manhattan Project. The Manhattan Project was working on researching and building an atomic bomb. Now, we don't really need to get too much into the science here, but we're basically like splitting atoms is basically what an atomic bomb is, pulling atoms apart and using the energy that is released from that to create a bomb. In 1945, it is ready to be used. FDR started the Manhattan Project but died before it was ready. In fact, the first time that his vice president, Harry Truman, had even heard of the Manhattan Project or an atomic bomb was the day that he was sworn in as president. So when he was vice president, FDR didn't tell him a lick about this project. That's how top secret this project was. Okay, in 1945, it is ready to be used. This is what my whole book was about, was should we have used it, should we not have used it, etc. Harry Truman writes a letter to Japan warning them, hey, Japan, you should surrender. He says, surrender or face prompt and utter destruction. He does not describe the atomic bomb. Japan does not respond. There are some unconfirmed reports that they actually were making fun of the surrender on the radio. So their kind of non-response was taken as they were ignoring it. They were not going to surrender. Remember when I said they saw surrender as shameful, so they're not going to take it very lightly. Truman orders an atomic bomb to be dropped on Japan. Now, again, if you have free time, the atomic bomb might be something you want to spend some time researching. It's kind of an interesting phenomenon. It was only tested once before it was used. It was never tested on humans, and they severely underestimated the atomic bomb's capabilities. They thought that the atomic bomb was just going to be like a strong bomb. Does that make sense? Like they thought it was going to be equal to like 200 pounds of TNT, which is like a pretty strong bomb. And it ended up being equal to like thousands of tons of TNT. It completely blew them away with their capabilities, with its destructive powers. And so, I don't want to. I was almost about to pop off about my book, but anyway, we're just gonna leave it there. The first atomic bomb was dropped on the city of Hiroshima in Japan on August 6th, 1945. At least 80,000 people died. It's a lot. That number and future numbers are probably not 100% accurate. It's probably much more than that due to some of the kind of side effects of the bomb and other kind of components. So it's probably much more than 80,000. But that's what our official figures are. In the 3 days that followed Hiroshima, Japan did not officially surrender, which I can't blame them. I feel like if 80,000 people died in 30 seconds, I feel like I'd be more worried about that. But anyway, it was actually, fun fact, it was actually supposed to be, well, not that fun, 5 days, but there was bad weather coming in, and so Truman ordered the bomb to be dropped early. So we dropped another bomb 3 days after August 6th on August 9th, 1945, on the city of Nagasaki. In Nagasaki, at least 45,000 people died. Nagasaki was more industrial, though, so while less people died in Nagasaki, there was much more property damage. And when I say property damage, like, I'm not joking. Okay? This is an image of the atomic bomb going off. Creates this huge mushroom cloud. And then this is an outskirt of an area. I can't remember if this is Hiroshima or Nagasaki. Impacted by the bomb. And the reason I know it's an outskirt is because this building is still standing. Within about a mile of the atomic bomb, or mile radius of the atomic bomb, everything was flattened. Everybody died. Anyone within approximately 500 meters of the explosion was incinerated immediately due to the fireball created from the blast, which is another reason why our death tolls are probably inaccurate because we don't have those bodies. They just basically turn to dust. It's like being instantly cremated. Some other effects are obviously the severe force. You can see just how forceful this bomb is. People were killed via buildings, crushing structures, crushing them. Um, Another problem that comes with the atomic bomb is severe radiation. It messes up your cell reproduction and the workings of your body and stuff. It can give you cancer. It can give you um, like growth, deformities and other kinds of issues. And so many people who physically survived Hiroshima and Nagasaki go on to develop different forms of cancer. So while they were not directly killed because of the atomic bombs, they were kind of indirectly killed through developing cancer from severe forms of radiation. We also see very powerful sunburns, which I know sounds kind of silly for me to include, but I'm not talking about your, oh no, I stayed out in the sun for 2 hours, no sunscreen. I'm talking about sunburns to the point where people's skin was peeling off of them. Not those thin little peels. I'm talking skin peeling down to muscle. Being able to see skin and bones and muscle underneath the skin. We have instances of people's like clothes patterns being burnt onto them. As you probably know, darker colors absorb light, lighter colors reflect light. And so people who were wearing patterns with mixtures of light and dark saw that where the darker pattern was burnt onto their skin, and lighter patterns were kind of shielded a little bit. Obviously, still in a great deal of pain, but very, very, very deadly bombs. After the second atomic bomb, Japan surrenders. We go through a series of treaty writings and concessions and such, but World War II was officially over. World War II lasts from 1939 to 1945. Remember that the United States does not join this war until 1941. We will talk about the effects of World War II in the next note video. I know many of you are feeling like, we're missing something here, Miss Dodge. I know. These notes are as long as they are, so I'm putting that in a separate note video. Okay? Goodbye, everyone.